Hello everyone, and welcome to Young Explorers. I hope you're doing well. As I said last week, I'm going to be interviewing Thomas today. I decided to do something a little different as it's the last Sunday in the month. So are you ready? Let's get back and see what happened when I talked with Thomas. So welcome Thomas, I'm so glad you could join us.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to do just a short interview with you. First of all, how have you been getting on during this lockdown? I know we've seen you on Sparkles and you've been helping with Young Explorers. So how else have you been using your time? How have you been getting on?
Oh, I've been living the dream. No, it's yeah. So for me, in terms of like work, for example, it's I work 2 days a week physically, so I still go into work, and then on the other 3 days I work from home, which is I'm getting used to now, but it was quite a weird adjustment because my job really is one of a physical job in terms of I need to be there to do certain things. So it ended up becoming me telling other people to do my job um, effectively. But I've been doing quite well in that, I feel. So and I've been enjoying, even as quiet as we're in London, it's quite nice to experience a different London, not hectic, not busy, just going in. Other things I've been doing, catching up a lot with my family, been zooming all over the place. So doing, so seeing both sides of my family, so that's my mum's side and my dad's side as well. So, I mean, we see them quite often already, but with lockdown, I get to see them every week, which is quite cool. Trying to do more studying the Bible. Wish I should do more really. But recently I was doing, looking at the kings and queens of Judah and Israel, which was quite fun also. So I've been doing all sorts of stuff really.
So it seems that you haven't been bored during lockdown, you've been quite busy.
Oh no, I've been, I've got stuff to do and to watch, or I'm making quizzes every Monday for the family and stuff and things like that. So no, I've kept myself entertained. So it's something I've always been able to do.
Well, that's good. And for those of us who don't know, can you just tell us what you do for work? You don't have to mention the company, but the
No, of
company
course,
name. But what,
the company will remain nameless, so they do not get shamed. Um, Whereas, because they in fact employed me. Now, so what I do is I work for a post-production television company. It's a company we help editing for TV shows, and there are some very prominent TV shows that we help in the editing process with. I will make them remain nameless as well.
so you're classed as a key worker then?
Yes, because the in that respect, obviously we're not saving lives, but we are saving people from boredom. Um, and in fact, yeah, the government, so like the BBC, wanted us to continue working to make sure we can get some programs, even if there's compilation shows out and that sort of thing. My particular role is I'm in the library department, and so what I do is anytime you film something, it goes onto a certain media. So it could be like a hard drive, which we call them transport drives or whatnot. And my job is whenever it comes in, it could come in that or different forms, is to let people know it's arrived, log it in, and then give it to the relevant people who are then going to take the footage from that and put it onto the system. So
Quite an interesting job, it sounds like. So the reason I wanted to do this sort of interview is also to talk about sort of your testimony and your experience as a Christian in the world. So how old were you when you became a Christian? Was there sort of a specific event, or is it something that happened more over time, would you say?
I think it's both. So for me, I became a Christian when I was 7. So it was when we were in Devon, and my dad was talking about. Now, there's 2 stories in the Bible which involve women weeping at the feet of Jesus. I believe he was talking about the one which involved Judas. So it's that particular one, and for whatever reason, I can't like articulate as fully, but for whatever reason, that really touched me. And I realized then and I needed to give my life to Christ. Now, as you're 7, it is quite a young age and things change over time. And so and I've been brought up in a Christian family. It's ironically the same one that Nathan's been brought up in. So, going to church was like breathe. It's like breathing. It's quite natural. I mean, it's not natural now, but in terms of, you know, we're so blessed to have so many people in our lives who knew Christ, and not going to church in a religious sense or in a sense of obligation, but doing it out of a joy and understanding of the true meaning of Christ. And having that, and a family, especially my mum's side, being surrounded by that was always very, very helpful and useful and lovely, which is not an experience that everyone gets. So for me, I became a Christian when I was 7, but the understanding of that and the knowledge of that has grown on since then, throughout my life as well.
So as you said, you were 7 and that your knowledge has grown. So would you say then you know a lot more now than you would at 7? Even at 7, you would have known sort of everything that you should know or need to know.
I don't know everything I should know and need to know now. You know, you would hope you would learn more since you were 7 than now going on to 27. I'm 26 at the moment. But since then, you know, definitely have learned so much more. And it's both through like reading the Bible, listening through sermons, but also through other people and Christians who have been in the faith longer. And all of that together has helped me so much in my Christian walk. You know, it's one you can't do in isolation, because, I mean, I know we are isolating at the moment, but isolating yourselves from everybody doesn't usually turn out well, especially Christian-wise, because you go cuckoo fast.
Yeah, that's right. It's important to have that support there. And as you said, you had that in terms of your actual family, but then also your Christian family. So given that you were sort of 7, so then you would have been a Christian as you were going through sort of primary school, sort of infants and juniors. What was your experience, or what was it like for you being a Christian at, say, primary school? Or even secondary school as well? What was it like there for you? What was your experience?
I mean, primary school was a lot more different because there wasn't really anyone you could say was like Christian, really. From what I could tell, who knows now? There could be some people going on the Lord on fire, which would be fantastic if that's the case. But that wasn't really the case when I was at at school. When I went to secondary school, that sort of changed, but was sort of, it's a lot more different because Church of England is a very wide chasm and stream, and my school was a very wide chasm and stream, and you had all sorts of people there. You had people there who clearly were only there because their parents went to church, and in some cases may have just gone to church just so they can get their kids into the school. That does happen in Church of England schools. And it was a hodgepodge of people, and so that was quite different in that way. There were definitely some genuine believers there, and certainly some of the staff, there's quite a few I remember who were really lovely, really, you know, following Christ and that sort of thing. But because of that weird mix, it was kind of odd. You didn't know where you exactly stand with everybody because of that mix. It's different if you go to a secular school or public school, because you kind of assume that already, you know, and there might be some people here, there might be some people there. But definitely doing secondary school, and definitely in sixth form, which got more, because when you go to sixth form, you got more of the mix, because it really didn't have as much, I'm going to say restrictions, but the guidelines that you did for secondary school when it comes to people of faith when you're in sixth form is completely different. And so when it came to that, it was very, very much even more eye-opening towards sixth form. And not to say these people were terrible or anything, you know, lovely people. And certainly when I went, one of my eye-opening experiences was Christian Union, both at the secondary, well, the sixth form level and uni, but definitely the sixth form level in particular, because you don't realize how wide it is until you go in there. And it was like, whoa, there's some people, and you're like, whoa.
When you say wide, do you mean in terms of a wide range of views or wide range of understanding of what it means to be a Christian?
Wide, all of it. So wide range in terms of what it means to be a Christian, a wide range in terms of theology, a wide range in terms of practice. So people who say they're Christian, but the way they act would lead you to think anything but, you know, so all of that sort of stuff and the life in itself all mixed together was what I experienced during those times.
So did you find it easy, hard, or just it's it's just that what it was in terms of being a Christian in that environment.
It is difficult because one of the difficulties is the fact you don't know where you stand in that sort of way. I think when it gets clear cut or clearer, it is in one sense easier because you're able to make more informed decisions that way. But when you got a whole mix, it is more difficult, especially for me. I like stuff black and white. I'm quite that way.
When you say informed decisions, you mean as in if you're not sure where someone stands in terms of their faith or their beliefs, it's hard to know how to approach them and what to say to them.
Yeah, how to just interact. Do you treat them as you would someone at church? Or do you treat them, you assume, not the worst, but do you assume, okay, these people, I say these, that's a worst phrase to use, don't use these people. But in terms of, okay, do I approach it like this? Do I approach it like that? It's very hard. But I think at the same time, as hard as that is, I think that is a lot of life. You know, I think even though it was a Christian school and it's a brilliant school and all of that, you know, that is life. You're going to get a mix of people from all sorts of places who have all sorts of different ideas about Christ, about the gospel and whatnot. That's parts and parcel of life. So it was good to, in that experience, to see that and also to see how not to do it, because then you know what you need to do yourself, as it were, instead. So
I noticed you did mention, you briefly dropped in about uni, that you went to university. And again, that's in a different environment. How would your experience of uni as a Christian be compared to, say, the experience you had at school or sixth form?
I would say a lot better, just because I think I grew my faith a lot more towards the end of sixth form till uni, and more of knowing what's, you know, what I believed in the gospel, having, you know, even clear understanding of the gospel and all that it entails. It's definitely, uni was a lot, I think, more of a better experience. That I didn't feel as much of there were still people, because I went to a Christian union, and you know, you still had that chasm, you still had that, you're not chasm, but you still had, you know, people from all sorts and different things like that. Hello.
Just been interrupted there, yes.
Interrupted by Dad. You still had that thing going on, but it wasn't more crystallized, and there was certainly a lot more people, I think, on it, if I'm being honest, with the gospel, and I was more surrounded. I didn't feel as alone in this situation of uni, even though the university was, you know, Chichester, you know, one of the smallest universities in the country, you know, it's not a Christian university at all, but I was more surrounded by people who were on it for Christ, to put it that way. I hate to use that description.
Well, another way of phrasing it, you felt that at school or sixth form, even though there were a number of people who would call themselves Christians, there's a wide range in how that would act, and many people would see things and interact differently than you would. But at uni, you had more, say, in common, more sort of core beliefs and similar ways of acting. So you had that understanding with each other and that support that you felt, as you said, you weren't alone. Would that be a way of putting it?
Yeah, that'd be a good way. And also, you're older. And so, because especially when I was at CU in sixth form, some of the stuff was so petty. And it was, now, the pettiness did continue to uni. There was some, goodness me, it was like Pettyville sometimes. But you did grow up, and there were more people, more mature in their faith at that point in time. And also, one of the reasons I think I had a great experience at uni was because obviously you have to do it, and I think you've experienced it yourself. Yeah, you can't rest on your parents' faith. Not you should anyway, but you're forced not to do that in that environment, because if you don't seek out a church, you will, something's going to go awry. If you don't seek out Christian friends, if you don't do that yourself, it's now on the initiative of you to do it for yourself. And uni definitely provided that, to the extent that I have I got an amazing church out of that, which I still am in great contact with today. And have great fellowship with them today. They're like my home from home. I mean, I can't visit there at the moment, but who were just amazing. And then people like that really helped with the uni experience, as well as people from Christian Union. I love other people who were connected. There were a few people who were, so we had a UCF worker, Becca, who was amazing. We also had a guy called Mark, who was he was a rector at the a Church of England church, but he was such an amazing guy, lovely man, and would just do Bible study with me, just out of his own back, and I didn't go to his church or anything like that. But it was people like that which helped me along even further. And I didn't feel like I was drifting all over the place. Whereas in sixth form or at secondary school, it wasn't as defined like that.
So going back to what you said there, sort of about your parents' faith, would that be that before you went to uni, you're at home, you're living with your parents, they're used to going to church on the Sunday and you'd kind of go with them, and that's kind of what you would do. But then at uni, it's up to you whether you find a church, it's up to you whether you actually go to church on Sunday or you go to the Christian Union. No one is necessarily taking you. You've got to make those arrangements. Is that kind of what you're sort of getting at?
Yeah, and you gotta do stuff in your own initiative too, because if you don't, nothing will happen also. And that goes both in terms of spiritual matters, but also just in terms of social matters. Especially for me, I don't really drive. So having to make sure getting people, if I end up getting driven, I've been chauffeured all over the place. Here, back Chichester to Bognor, back and forth all the time. It was amazing. And just experiencing that as well. And also being at a place where you weren't identified by your parents per se, because there's nothing wrong with that, but it was different in the sense that people didn't know really my dad, and people didn't know my mom, and people didn't know you or whatnot. People knew me for me.
So you weren't known as say your dad's son or your mum's son. Yes. You were known as Thomas.
Yes. Although some people would call me Jason, but that's another conversation.
So moving on, as you did hint, you're nearly 27, not quite yet. So you live, well, depending on who you ask, some will say that's no time at all, and others will say that's years. But would you say you've had any particular challenges in your life being a Christian, or has it all been like plain sailing, no issues whatsoever?
I can't really think of like particular. Well, there's been bits and bobs of things, which have been challenging here and challenging there. I think challenges come whether you like it or not. I think lockdown's quite clear that's the case. That, honey, whether you like it or not, you're gonna face through challenges. So all the people who say life is just clear sailing and you're not going to get through any problems by living on another planet. Having said that, sometimes the challenges, for me, some of the issues are worse when you make a scenario in your head than the actual reality. So, and that's not in terms of saying just think positively or anything, but in terms of sometimes, so to put into perspective, for example, my job, where I work within the TV industry, the first, I wanted to, just finding jobs, things like that. And that was probably one of the hardest things in terms of a setback, was trying to find a job. And I got one relatively quickly, but I thought it was never going to end because I just didn't know what would accept me for my credentials, and also uni as well, because I ended up going to the uni through clearing, which wasn't my ideal, but at the same time, it was the best experience I ever had. And similar with jobs, I applied to someone and didn't accept me, but then this job came up to do it and then I got through as a result of that. And yeah, I was just blown away by the whole thing, and the fact I enjoy working there. It's people who I really love, respect, love working with them, still get the opportunity to do that. It's incredible. But especially for me, when going into TV, I had all these scenarios in my head, especially as a Christian and it's TV, and you're like, sometimes you think persecution bells and sometimes the worst things, crop up in your head. And then when you actually go into that situation, a door which you don't even knew was open, you're like, it wasn't as bad as it's nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be, being able to be a Christian in that environment. Nowhere near that at all. And, it's the world, you do encounter things, that sort of thing. But that's been a real blessing in terms of seeing that and not letting my worries and my doubts, as it were, cloud something else.
So you were worried that when you were going to work sort of in the TV industry, that would have a sort of a big impact on your faith. Is that what you you mean?
Yeah, yeah. And I thought it would just be a case of you'll be singled out and all this sort of stuff and seen as weird. Now, I am weird, and I pretty much accept that, both in terms of, at me, I'm really weird, but also in terms of, my faith as well sticking out. But I think more and more as going through work and just embracing that is the case. The fact, so many people are so respectful of that and are mindful of that and are loving about that as well, and will ask me questions if need be, and we'll have good conversations. Stuff like that I didn't thought was possible. There is this negative portrayal about, how everything's so dark and you can't really pierce it much with the light at all. And if you're a Christian in this sort of area or this sort of work, that it means nothing's gonna, and then what I found is almost the opposite's true, in the sense that, there are issues which come up, but it's nowhere near as I thought challenging as I thought it would be in that regard. And in fact, it's just helped me in my faith more and more secure in my faith. Whereas, you could thought at the beginning it might have a negative effect.
And also, I know you've talked with me and others about this. You felt sort of comfortable to be able to share your faith with those at your work, and they've even come and asked you questions, haven't they, on what it means to be?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's been such a place, because I think it's been the first arena really where I've, I had obviously, even school, I had obviously, church school, uni, CU. This is the first real experience where it's just effectively, as far as I can tell, me by myself in an environment which is not Christian at all. It's the second environment, it's work, and yet to be in that environment, and then also to be engaged with people on a daily basis, which I may not have had that. I wouldn't necessarily have done that in my other areas of life, because I would have been hanging around my Christian friends and whatnot. And that's been really nice, and that blessing, because it's put me in a situation where I'm in the world now, and I can be and like, I don't do it perfectly by any means necessary. But as a result of that, also, I think I've had so much better conversations because of that. I think the most fruitful conversation I've ever had about Christ and whatnot, and that's regardless whether people repent and put their trust in Jesus, but have given them sins or not, regardless of the outcome. Being able to do that, I've had the best conversations, I think, for me, certainly outside of a normal Christian setting like camp or whatever, at work. And it has just been doing day-to-day stuff. We're talking, and bam, we're having a conversation, and it just happens naturally. It's not even something I pre-planned, or I get out a notebook and I'm like, okay, we do plan A here, we then slip the gospel in there, plan B, plan C, they get saved, plan D, they come to, it's not like that. And that's been nice as well, because it felt the little that I have to give that God can use. And it doesn't have to be a case of, it's all about me, and if I don't do it, that salvation is based on my efforts in that regard. Obviously, we should proclaim the gospel, not diminishing that at all. But it gives you the weight off to say, okay, the little that I have that God can use, and it can be done in an organic and easier way than it feels like me manipulating people and so forth. So that's been a real blessing as well.
And also, just because it's something I've found, when you're talking with others who aren't believers, who don't necessarily have that background yourself, and may ask you questions you've never thought about before, does that help in your understanding of your faith, or is it kind of, when someone asks a question you don't know, that kind of will shake your faith a bit?
I don't think it shakes my faith. Any question under the sun, God knows the answer to. And so it doesn't really shake my faith. And I don't think I've really had any, and not to say there aren't clever people out there are, but there hasn't been any questions where it's been like, oh, it's rocked me to the core. Because when I look at the Bible, I just see it's so true about humanity. That's one, and no matter what people say, the fact it gets humanity so on point in terms of how we're sinful, we think about ourselves all the time, that sort of thing. No other world system or thought process contemplates that in the way that the Bible does. Mm-hmm. And to me, I'm just like, why? You got something, because when you see the news and it's always bad, it's wall-to-wall virus. Even if it wasn't a virus, it'd be wall-to-wall depression. If it wasn't a virus, it'd be something else to bore people to death and to not to death, but in terms of, grip people with fear, because it's constantly about fear. And you see all the injustices, as it were, and the sinfulness in the world. And like the Bible gets us so spot on. And yet also the Bible provides so much hope as well, which is the only thing that can really answer that situation. And so for me, that doesn't really shake me when people ask me questions and I don't necessarily know the answer to. Now, if they do answer questions I don't know the answer to, I'll look it up. I'll look at my Bible, look up some sermons, and there are some questions which are, some of them are very bizarre and are like, I don't know how we got to this, and all this sort of stuff and things like that. But at the same time, the questions I ask you're not sure about, when you are sure that, Christ is a sure foundation to depend on and nothing else is, that just helps you to go back and draw back to that. Like, okay, so see, what are you saying in this? What are you saying in that? Because if that isn't in place, anything will blow you off in terms of feelings, thinking about who God is, the truth about God is, and God is not a liar. He's not someone to be mocked, things like that. And so that's, for me, when people come out with questions, that's probably where I would go around it.
So obviously you've talked about what you do at work. Also, we know you do quite a lot at Woodside in terms of you're involved in the music group, you're involved with Young Explorers and also Gen X. So the question is, why do you do those things at Woodside? Why do you have you been involved in those things?
Oh, good question. The reason why I do those things, I mean, it is, I do have a family which is similar to doing that, but that's not the reason why. The reason why I do such things like is because I want to use my gift to help the church and to help others as well. And so for me, for example, me playing my cello would be one of them. It's a small way to help people in their worship. Helping out at Gen X as well is a small way of helping, kids out there, things like that as well. Also, and doing Sunday school yet again is helping to, proclaim the gospel to little ones today, be instructed the same way I was instructed when I was a young age also as well. So it's all those things, is doing it so I can to help to serve others as Christ served, the church and served us, and to show that love of Christ to others in just different ways. And it's not like doing any other club, because I've had it before where you almost feel you're supposed to be doing this Christian event, but it almost feels like a moral like scouts group or whatever and things like that. And that's nice in and of itself, but that ain't the gospel. And if it isn't that, I don't know why we're doing it ultimately. And so in that sense, being able to do these different things for that end goal and that end purpose has been, the main reason why.
So obviously you as I said, you help out with Young Explorers and Gen X. So you're there also at Sunday at noon, but also in the morning you go to the breaking of bread service, or the morning meeting that we call it. Why do you attend that?
I attend that because it's a chance to worship God. It's a chance for us as a church to come together. It's probably our main time. It's also a chance to remember Christ and what he did on the cross. That so has always been devoted to that, and the many different aspects when the different brothers come up and speak. They talk about the many different aspects of Christ and what he's done for us, and sometimes looking at his humanity, sometimes looking at his deity, sometimes looking at all these different things. And it's amazing when you get someone who starts and then there's a through line throughout, and it's clearly God ordained, because people they're coming up and they've got these different things to add to that. And so we go there to worship Christ, remember his death and his resurrection as well. Easter's not just relegated to one Sunday a year, it's all year round, especially at the breaking of bread. It's every week we remember that, and he says to do this in remembrance of me. And so as a church, we do that in remembrance of him.
Also, a question I wanted to ask. I know there are many verses in the Bible. Do you have a specific one that's your favorite, or a few that you're favorite, or you really like, or it's so hard to choose?
Yeah, it's quite hard to choose. I do like Ephesians 2 verses 8-9, for it's by grace you have been saved through faith, not of yourself, it's a gift of God. That verse is probably because it's the gospel in a nutshell, looking at how it's not how we can do stuff in order to be made right with God, but it's what God has done for us on our behalf, that if we put our faith and trust in him, that we can be saved. So that's probably my verse. Also 1 John 1 verse 9, because I remember as a kid, if we confess our sins, God is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us of unrighteousness. So, but there's so many others, and especially I think during lockdown, there's been different verses which have been more poignant. Like, so the one in Psalm 46, I'm not going to quote this properly, but it talks about though the earth give way, and it mentions beforehand basically how we can depend on God and things like that and still trust in him. And it's different things like those verses well during this time which have been really helpful, because one verse like that is worth so much weight in gold than any news update that you can imagine and things like that. So that's what I would say about in terms of memory verses, as it were.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have as well, Thomas. I'm going to just give you one more question, and then the interview will be over. And it's specifically speaking to the young explorers. Is there any words of advice or encouragement you would like to give to them based on your experience or things that you've learned from studying the Bible? What sort of advice would you give them or encouragement?
Okay. Yeah. So I like to look at the camera and be like,
it's up to you.
Them. I think for me, especially now, I think, another passage, we talk about passage that we like, really has spoken to me during this is when Jesus talks about do not worry. For today has enough worry of itself. What can you gain in terms of how much gaining of an hour can you do with worrying about something? It doesn't gain anything. And with that, that's really been useful for me. And I think that can be useful to everyone here, because worrying about a situation, especially something like this, as traumatic as it is, doesn't help in the sense that you can't be useful to other people. And so the first thing, and there are justifiable fears, obviously, and concerns. But the first thing is to not be anxious and to trust in God. Because if he takes away, if he is able to take away your sin, which is the stuff which infects this entire earth, which includes the coronavirus and everything that is entailed with it, if he can do that, he can carry you through anything. Now, it may not be nice what he carries you through. As we said before, trouble comes whether you like it or not. Whether you're a Christian or it comes, you can't avoid it. But at the same time, it does mention, how all good things work together for good and for those who love him according to his purpose. And God is in control, and that should be the most comforting thing you can think of. If it was the government in control of everything, good luck. But thankfully, we have someone who is perfect in every way, who's holy, who is just, who cares about us. He's not just in the distance, just chilling out while we're all freaking out down here. He is in us, in this every step of the way, and he is loving and gracious. And with that, you can trust him. No one knows what tomorrow holds, and that was true 3 months ago, and that is true now. That's always been true. So people who say, we know what's going to happen tomorrow, this, that, they don't. They never did in the first place, because everything is by God's good grace in the first place anyway. So trust in him, depend on him. Do not worry. If you are anxious and you keep reading the news like you're on speed dial, just looking, step away. Seriously, read a book. Go outside. You can go outside now. Go outside. Do something else. Watch something if you're allowed to do that. Take your mind off of it. Do not let this burden be on you, because Christ took the ultimate burden of sin. You don't need to have that around you. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to have that burden of carrying the weight of the world's shoulders, because Christ's already taken care of that. And lived every day, just focus on the day at a time, and before you know it, we'll be in a new season. So that would be my word of advice. Was that looking straight? That's my word of advice.
No, those are good words of encouragement, and important to remember that God is in control. As you say, he's working things out according to his purpose. Now, just before we end, I've just remembered something that I was supposed to ask you right at the start. So we'll do it at the end.
Right.
And that is, you set us a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
To read through the book of Esther and to see how many times it says God, correct?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Okay. Can you reveal the answer then to the challenge? How many times?
Yes. So the shape of the object that I'm going to give you is the answer.
Okay.
So that looks like a O
Uh-huh.
or a zero.
Uh-huh.
It's even got the line through it if you want to be fancy, because God's name is mentioned in the book of Esther 0 times.
Okay, so you mean you had everyone read through the whole of Esther for no reason?
Absolutely. Lois did it when back in the day. I thought I'll bring it back. So yeah, but it's amazing that's whole book, because even though God's name is not mentioned once, God is so heavily involved in that book in terms of his working everything back to us, working everything together for all our good. And you see that definitely in that book. Even though his name is not mentioned, he permeates throughout that whole text.
Yeah, I guess that applies to today, in that we may not know exactly how God is working, but we know that he is ultimately.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that, Thomas, and I hope everyone who's been able to join in and watch this has enjoyed listening to Thomas and learning a bit more about him. And hopefully we'll see you next time. So until then, goodbye.
Bye.